Good morning and welcome to another program called the Veterans Forum. My name is Bob Stevens and I had the pleasure and the honor of hosting this show for about 12 years now. The show is coming to you from the Derry Community Television Studios here in Derry, New Hampshire. For those of you who are not familiar with the program, I ask that you take a little time to look at it, particularly you guys and gals who have not yet been made aware of what we're trying to do. The show is being broadcast, put together in cooperation with the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project, wherein there are stations such as this and guys like me, I guess, if they can and will, contact every guy and gal who served anywhere in any branch, and if they can and will come and share their experiences in a televised recording. The information with the paperwork will be forwarded to the Library of Congress and be included in their permanent database, so that every guy and gal who did anything will have a chance to have that history as they made it recorded as they wanted it and saw it happen. Now, before I start, though, let me take these things off. I can't see them on. I had this given me about 3 or 4 weeks ago now, and I'd like to take a few moments and talk about it. It's a special program up and down the length of the state where any guy and gal, or even friends of guys and gals, veterans, who feel they need some help or might need something additional in bits of information, to call this number, 211, not 911, but 211, and you'll be put in contact with this cadre of people and organizations. They're here to help you in any way they can to make sure that what your needs are fulfilled. Don't be bashful. It's there for you to use, but you'll have to knock on the door, if you will, to get it. But when you do, it'll probably be one of the best programs that you've ever been part to. It's there for you. Use it. Now today we have another fellow who did some things way back when I gave Paul ready. What we'd like to do, though, is to start with a photograph of when he used to be, what he used to look like, if you will, back in the early days. And we'll cut that in and we'll see it. Now, Paul, what I'd like you to do, that's you right there, young fella. That's before and this is after and during. I'd ask Paul to introduce yourself, spell your last name, if you will, for the record, where you now live in your branch of service and service states.
It's Paul Cote, spelled C-O-T-E, United States Army.
Where and when?
Signed on the delayed entry the delayed entry program in August of 1998. I had just finished my associate's degree from Castleton State in Vermont, and I looked at the reserves as a way of kind of bolstering my resume once I had my degree. The delayed entry program allowed me to go do my basic, my AIT at Fort McClellan, and then come back and start just in time to finish or continue a baccalaureate degree at Northeastern University. Basically what I did is I transferred all my credits from my associates to my bachelor's at Northeastern. But because Northeastern operates on the quarter system, it allowed me to take that time in between, do my basic and AIT, so that way I could just drill while I was in school.
Okay, now, like a lot of people, I have no idea what your alphabet is. What is AIT, please? So you have to remember, we don't know, you're telling us. Okay?
Advanced Individual Training. It was my MOS school, my military occupational specialty.
Thank you.
In this case, I was a 95B, military police, which from what I understand now, they've designated, at least the Army has, all of the enlisted and officer MOSs to fall under just the officer MOSs. So 95B in its present form is no longer in the Army vocabulary. It is my understanding everything falls under the officer criteria.
Which means what?
Well, whatever the officer rating is for the military police. So if you were a first or second lieutenant, right, if you were a first, right,
okay.
If you were a first or second lieutenant as an MP or chemical or communications or logistics, administrative support, whatever have you, they no longer have enlisted designators and officer designators. Everything falls under the officer designator now.
Good then.
Regardless of the MOS.
Okay.
So that's the only similarity from what I understand that has changed since my days in uniform.
Okay. What was your span of time during service? When you went?
I was in a total of 14 years, which covered Guard, Reserve, and active duty. I did, obviously my active duty time was Persian Gulf and advanced individual training at Fort McClellan. I did a couple of extended tours with the Mass Guard, which covered Natick Research Lab Soldier Systems Command in the early 90s, actually mid-90s.
Well, let's start. We've covered a lot of time in maybe 3 sentences. What I'd like to do, now we know where you are today. I'd like to go back and resurrect you. How you start, for example, where and when were you born? How was your family life growing up? Do you have any brothers or sisters in the service? That kind of stuff to define who you are, what you did, what you brought to the table.
Well, this is your show, sir. You,
Okay.
you lead the way. I shall follow.
Okay. I've just asked you 9,000 questions.
Like I said, I was born in Nashua, local New Hampshire resident most of my life.
When?
Early 60s, so pushing that late 40s, early 50s range. Family consists of my mom, who's still alive, my father, who was a Korean War veteran, and I'm actually wearing his hat today in his honor, passed away in March.
Oh.
He is surely missed by the family. Family consists of a sister and a brother-in-law, 2 nieces, and some cousins. Come from a very, very small family.
Mm-hmm. Very close-knit, though, I bet. Or shouldn't I make that? You open the door and you never know what's going to come out.
Like all families, there are issues that come up from time to time.
Okay.
But I think my sister knows that anything that should happen, I would be there for her.
Amen.
I would be there for my nieces.
Can we be I'm being real nosy now, but what was your childhood like when growing up? What did you do? What kind of schooling did you have? Where did you go to school?
Okay.
What did you do in school?
Mostly Bedford-related schools. Went through McKelvey, went through Peter Woodbury, went to Memorial too, actually. The era in which I was eligible to start going to school, Bedford was expanding by leaps and bounds. So what essentially was McKelvey School for my sister, who's 2 years older, served her from kindergarten all the way up through the 8th grade, and then going on to high school. In the 2 years or a year and a half from when she started to when the year and a half from her birth to mine, Bedford had gone through a lot of expansion. So Memorial School came online, so I started with them. And then Peter Woodbury School came online, so I transferred there. And what the Bedford school system did was, as opposed to having one school that covers all the grades, they had 2 other schools that would cover like 4th through 6th, and then 7th through 8th. And I just happened to get lucky and hit all 3 of them.
Oh, yeah, but you've got a lot of experience you can have from them. Now, how was it growing up back in those days? Now, when you were in school, were you a good student? Any sports activities? Drama club?
I played minor league baseball for about 2 years. I don't really think I excelled at any particular sport, partly because I just wasn't interested. I'm not going to lie to you. It wasn't through lack of trying. It was just through lack of interest. Sports never really gravitated with me early on. As far as a student in school, I was diagnosed learning disabled very early on. What's the term I'm looking for? We invert letters.
Oh, dyslexic?
Dyslexic, thank you. Thank you very kindly. I was special education learning disability coded back when teachers themselves and folks in the education field were still kind of educating themselves.
That's rough.
I am a product of the early 70s where you're in that special group, you're in that special class. And this was the teachers talking.
Did you ever ride the small bus?
No.
Did you ever read that story?
No, I never did.
Have your mother read it to you, because it's something. No, I'm not joking. It's a very poignant story about the kids like yourselves and me for a bit. Rode the small bus, which was a special bus that took the kids who were, quote, different to school after or before the other classes. And the reaction and the treatment and how you felt and how they overcame that and how they helped the teachers learn what it was all about.
Well, I tell people that I went through, special education early on when the educators themselves were still
Yeah.
learning. Back when, people like Mr. McGee, one of my early teachers, was teaching us, this is a ball, you bounce the ball. I'm like, really? This is what we're at?
Yeah.
But it was 1972, 73, whatever year it was.
Okay.
They didn't understand things like dyslexia. They themselves, the educators, were still learning about the process. So I give a lot of slack where slack is due. But being a soldier, you learn to be self-sufficient. So I learned to adapt, improvise, and overcome. I realized that there were certain topics that no matter how hard I studied, no matter how hard I worked, it was going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
Contrary to my sister, who, quite honestly, school came very easy to her. She was not one to have to go home and study for 3 or 4 hours. She didn't have to, work weeks on end to generate a term paper. She could sit down in a matter of hours and put something out, and it was A quality. Me, to the contrary. I had to do a rough draft, rewrite the rough draft, correct my notes, check it again, proofread it.
Okay.
I mean, it was a gradual process. And then in the end, I was lucky if I had a B-. I didn't have that type of academic ability, but I did learn to adapt. I remember being my senior year in high school, and a very popular teacher, whose name I shall not use because he's still in the public education system, told me, and I quote, "Paul, you're a great guy, you've got a lot to offer society, but don't think about college because you'll never make it. You'll set yourself up for disappointment." And I took that in 1983 as motivation. I said, okay, a naysayer, a doubter. The Army teaches you to adapt, improvise, and overcome. Maximum utilization of all available resources. And I was kind of in that mindset even before I raised my hand and signed papers. I said, okay, I'll take you at your word. You're the educated professional. You're the teacher.
Yeah.
So I took a year off. I graduated high school in 1983, didn't think about school, didn't think about continuing ed, didn't think about college or future. I just, get a job. I worked retail.
Yeah.
I worked retail for a number of years. And I thought to myself one night after work, there's got to be more to life than this. There's got to be more than unloading trucks. There's got to be more than putting product on a shelf. Life has more in store for me. So on a gamble, I went back to college. I went to St. A's. Well, not really back to. I enrolled in. And I took a part, St. Anselm's College in Goffstown.
We're parochial. You've got to let the world know what it means.
True. I apologize.
Okay.
So on a whim, I enrolled in one part-time class at St. Anselm's College in Goffstown, and this was 1985. And I took a history class because I was always, history to me was a natural evolution. I could read it, I could understand it, I could understand exactly where they were coming from, what was their goal, what was their intention, why did Thomas Jefferson do what he did, why was the Civil War fought in this particular manner, what was the meaning, what was the principle for whatever the topic was. History and politics kind of rolled right off me. So I took a history class with Dr. Leakey, not Dr. Leakey, anyway. And I worked a little harder than I normally would have in that type of class, but I realized that you're in college now.
Yeah.
The standards are a lot higher. You can't just show up, even if you're naturally gifted in that area. You have to work, you have to study, you have to read. And I managed to get a C. So that was my motivation. I said, okay, now I'll take a class that's a little challenging, that's going to force me to work a little bit more. And I took a criminal justice class. And
Any particular reason? Any motivation?
Well, I knew that was the profession I wanted to go into, but I wanted to start with one class to kind of test me academically. I wanted to kind of look at myself and go, am I kidding myself? Is this going to be a waste of money? Is this going to be a waste of my parents' money? Am I going to set them up for disappointment? Or do I really have it and I'm just not challenging myself? I'm not. So when I got that C in that history class, I said, okay, it was Dr. Looney, by the way. I said, okay, I'm going to challenge myself. So I took a criminal justice class with one of the noted professors up at St. A's at the time, and whose name also escapes me. And I managed to get a C out of that, but I worked a little bit harder. And I was like, okay, I kind of proved to myself that I have the ability to do this. It's just a matter of harnessing my own inner energy.
Drive.
So that's when I enrolled at Castleton. And Castleton State up in Vermont was known for their 2-year degrees in criminal justice. And I had known early on that I wanted to do something in law enforcement, physical security. I also knew that I wanted to go in the Army. But I said, well, if I go in the Army now, I'm going to start as, you know, an E1. I don't really have any skills, marketable abilities to offer the Army, anything to negotiate. But if I go and get a 2-year degree, then I can look at other opportunities within the Army and maybe start off on a higher plane, have more opportunities available to me. So I went to Castleton, got my 2-year degree, and got ready to graduate, and I said, well, what am I going to do? Do I cash in my 2-year degree and look at civilian opportunities, or do I live out my dream and I join the Army? And I thought, well, a 2-year degree is great, but now that I have the abilities, now that I have the self-confidence, and I've adapted study procedures to make me successful, I kind of conquered my demons. So I said, okay, I'm gonna go for gold. I'll join the reserves, and in the interim, I'll apply at Northeastern in Boston. So during that break from when I finished my associate's degree in Vermont to being eligible to go to school in Boston, there was about a 6-month break because, again, they operated on the quarter system. Castleton operated on the semester system. So by the time I finished at Castleton, there was a kind of a break. Yeah. So I started in September of 1988 at Northeastern University. But in the interim, I did my my reserve time, my initial reserve obligation, basic training in AIT. So that way, when I came back in June, that would have given me until September to report to Northeastern. So in the interim, I could start doing my drillings and have a little bit of money. Having gone through basic and AIT, that then qualified me for the Montgomery GI Bill, which was the reserve obligation, which paid me $140 a month to go to school, which at Northeastern at the time in 1988, by that time frame's money, that didn't buy a textbook at Northeastern. So I was able to kind of save my money, persevere, and I finished my bachelor's degree just in time to go to the Persian Gulf.
Good planning.
I kind of suspected the writing was on the wall. I remember being in a criminal justice class at Northeastern in Boston, and one of my fellow students was in the Massachusetts Air Guard. So we used to kibitz back and forth, and she indicated, she's like, yeah, the red flag went up. It looks like we're going to get activated. It looks like we're going. And we just happened to be talking about MOSs and jobs and that sort of thing. And she's like, by the way, what do you do again? And I said, well, I was a military police officer. And she's like, well, you'll be getting the call soon. Yeah. And when I thought about it from a militaristic standpoint, anytime you have any type of large-scale operation that covers land, air, all the facets of the military, you're going to need law enforcement to keep things lined up. So I knew it was inevitable because at the time, the Army only had so many active duty MPs. They only had so many reserve MPs. They only had so many Guard MPs. And when you were looking at a theater of operation like we had, you're going to need more than what the active Army had at that point. So that's when the call-ups started in early August, right after Saddam went in. Matter of fact, when I was at Northeastern, I had actually gotten a deferment from my unit to finish my finals with my class while the rest of the unit was in Gagetown, Canada. And I was allowed to do a home station AT that particular summer, which stands for annual training. And while I was at Northeastern taking my finals, when they were at Gagetown, they were getting flash alerts or situation reports. And you know, basically the call came in, 94th MP, we want a readiness report on you. Now, a readiness report can be asked for at any time, at any level of the command. It's not an indication that you're going somewhere, but it is an indication that they are looking at you, that the higher command is looking at you for mobilization purposes. It's not a guarantee you're going somewhere. It just means we're looking at you.
You're on ready, in effect.
Exactly. So we knew at some point that, okay, you've got this unknown at the time situation going on in the Persian Gulf. You've got this guy named Saddam Hussein running around causing mayhem and chaos, and the 94th ARCOM is asking us for a readiness report. People that had been around the system for a while, the rumors started, the gossip started. You know, we're definitely going, we're going by this time, we're going by that time. I managed to finish my academic requirements at Northeastern in August, and again, the writing was on the wall. I knew I was going somewhere. So I wasn't afforded the opportunity to network and kind of take advantage of, you know, resume writing and cover lettering and interviewing and all that sort of stuff, professional networking that most college students are allowed to do, because I knew that at some point Uncle Sam's going to ask me to make do on my obligation.
Now, when you say make do, were you under some sort of a contract if you
Oh, yes.
give so many hours or months or years? Explain that so that people like me can understand it.
The original contract I signed with the United States Army was with the reserve component, which at the time was 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer. I signed on a 6 and 2 basis, which was a 6 years active guard or reserve obligation and 2 years inactive. In my case, I just went the whole straight contract. So I knew at some point, if a presidential order came down, they could say, Paul, stop your life, whatever you're doing.
You come and say,
Yeah, put your greens on and report in. And that's exactly what happened. Thanksgiving Eve, 1990, I got the call. And we had a drill that weekend before that, because Thanksgiving is always on a Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. We had a drill that prior weekend, and the word came down from the commander that if by Thursday or Friday, if you get a call and your NCOIC uses a particular phrase, that means you've been activated. And the reason they use that phrase is for some people that may have several people in the house and a couple of people answer the phone simultaneously, they don't want to cause panic in the family by saying you're going to war. So they had a code word planted out or planned out. And for the life of me now, I forget what that code word was, but he used it in his conversation with me, and I was like, okay, very good. You know, and my dad, being a Korean War veteran, understood that when I signed that there was a very good real possibility that I may get called. So I knew he would be okay with the news, but I wasn't sure about my mom. I knew my mom would be a little concerned, as all moms are. You never stop being a parent. And God love her, she hasn't.
You're still well-fed and happy and warm. What more do you need?
Yeah, fat is, yes, that's a very...
I didn't say fat, I said well-fed.
Excuse me.
I'm a member of the club.
Yes, I don't look at all like the old photo in the
Now, when
Boston
do you
Globe.
change from the reserve status, if you will, into active? I don't get the transition point.
When we were officially placed on active duty, we reported in for another drill, I believe, that following weekend, because our orders kicked off that day, which meant that we were under federal active duty status. We were now considered, you know, U.S. soldiers. We were no longer reservists. We were no longer guardsmen. We were no longer 2 weeks in the summer, 1 weekend a month. We were now every single day. So essentially, from that phone call on Thanksgiving Eve, my life was now on hold. My life was now subject to the United States. Exactly. I couldn't make plans to go to the movies on Saturday. I couldn't make plans to do anything because I knew I had to report in. So that weekend, they assembled another drill, and then from there, we were going to be getting more information from our higher headquarters, what was going to happen from here.
Let me interrupt something. Have you now completed your college degree work?
Yes, yes, I had finished that in August.
Okay, well, doesn't it qualify you for OCS or something? Or
Well, that
didn't
was-
you think about that?
Well, that was the thing. It was not really the time to be thinking about self at that point. It was to be thinking about unit, mission. If I had stayed in the ROTC detachment, like I was at Northeastern, the Liberty Battalion, if I had stayed with them, I would have been commissioned as a second lieutenant, and I would have been non-deployable, because the Army would have had other plans for me. because at the time, once you get commissioned, you'd have to go through OBC after that, which is Officer Basic Course, and then your skill identifier. Because basically, once you get commissioned, all you are is a second lieutenant. You're a second lieutenant, you're a bar, that's it.
They mold you what you need.
Right. So even though you're prior enlisted and you held an MOS, a military occupational specialty, that might not necessarily translate to what the Army has in store for you now. Because now that you're a commissioned officer, there may not be spots in what you went to school for. You know, you may have started as an enlisted person in transportation, but then got commissioned into chemical agents or chemical warfare, PSYOPs, intelligence, communications, logistics, administrative support. You know, it's wherever the branch of military wants you to go, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines,
When you were in
Coast
the
Guard.
reserve, were you in an MP status?
Yes, yes, I was a...
That followed through with you then?
Again, it depends on what because once your status changes, when you go from officer to enlisted, your status is going to change. So in this case, the Army now reserves the right to say, okay, you were a good MP as an enlisted person, but now that you're commissioned and you're an officer, we want you to look in this range. And right now we need logistics people. Right now we need communications people. Right now we need motor transport.
So then your MOS changes with
Yes.
that assignment. Okay, good.
So
Yeah,
at
excuse
which-
my ignorance, I got to
Yeah.
keep going.
So they would send you to OBC, which is Officer Basic Course, and that's basically basic training for officers. You have to start all over again. And then from there, you go to your branch school, whether it's field artillery or in some cases, some people were allowed to stay in, you know, the MOS that they had, but then they would send you to the officer version of it, which is more leadership skills than it is technical on-the-ground type stuff.
And you're transferred when you went, your MP stuff followed with you or was there waiting for you? I'm not asking the question the right way, but what you had training to do in the reserve, in effect, transferred into what you are now being assigned?
If I was to go ROTC, if I was commissioned, and if I had gone to OBC, if there was opening in the MP Corps that they needed MP officers, then yes, I could have gone that route. Because I stayed purely academic, I dropped the ROTC program my junior year because it was conflicting with my studies. And like I had said, I was academically challenged early on. So I didn't want to put all my energies into ROTC and then lose out academically because I would have been dropped from the ROTC program. You have to maintain a C-level average at any institution in order to stay ROTC or some sort of commissioning basis.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, I'll finish the degree. Then I can look at OCS through the Guard or Reserve. I can look at the Warrant Officer program. I can look at other things. As luck would have it, the Persian Gulf kicked off. My decisions were made for me. I was going to stay enlisted for a while. Unfortunately, I stayed enlisted too long.
Permanent PFC, huh?
No, actually, I was a permanent E4.
No, whatever that means. I go back, my rate doesn't even show in the Navy anymore.
Really?
Yeah, it was something about John Paul Jones was the last one to use it or something like that. Okay, now that you're in, where and when were you assigned to your company, battalion, or whatever, and how'd you grow from there?
Okay. Our reserve company was molded into a battalion, which was molded into a brigade. It was kind of ironic because we were an Army reserve unit that got tasked to a higher headquarters from the National Guard, which was the 210th MP Battalion out of Detroit, Michigan. They were tasked to the 89th MP Brigade out of Fort Hood, Texas. So you had an active duty brigade overseeing a National Guard battalion overseeing a reserve component. So we had all three entities of the Army working side by side simultaneously, in some cases the same compound. Because we had folks from the battalion, we had folks from the regiment, etc.
Now, when you said compound, does that mean that you are now overseas?
We were boots on the ground in country now.
When you hit the States, maybe after the when
Okay.
did you leave the States and assume your new position and your new duties?
We got sent from that drill weekend, placed on active duty. We went to Fort Devens, did our time at Fort Devens, which it kind of goes to the logic of the Army. We're training at Fort Devens in Massachusetts, in December, January 1990, cold weather environment in the winter, training for a hot desert environment in a cold weather environment.
Makes absolute sense. I'm completely unqualified, so send me.
Well, the whole thing was they wanted us to get conditioned to operational readiness. And it's like, so why didn't they send us to Fort Huachuca, Arizona? At least we'd have the temperature to, you know, we'd have the sand, we'd have other things to contend with, other things to get us ready. So we thought that was kind of ironic, but that was the mindset of the Army. They send you to the closest active duty facility that can get you ready to go. And at the time, in 1990, that was Fort Devens. So we went to Fort Devens, we did our time. We were actually at our mobilization send-off ceremony at Fort Devens in January 1990 when a PFC interrupted a one-star general who was giving us the send-off to say, oh, by the way, we have now switched from Desert Shield to Desert Storm. And you could have heard a pin drop in the auditorium because everybody on the military side of the house knew that we had gone from a peace initiative to an actual engaged, weapons are being fired, weapons are hot, active engagement. We had actually gone to combat. We had switched from an observer role. We have a large body of U.S. forces here in case something has happened, Desert Shield, to an actual, okay, now we're moving, we're going to be moving forward. The timetable has passed. Saddam has kind of...
You've gone from the shield to the storm.
Exactly, yep. So those of us that understood the lingo went basically, okay, you know, we've gone from we could be going to war to yes, we're actually going to a hot zone now. So it was kind of a wake-up call. The 94th MP on that bus ride from Fort Devens to Westover Air Force Base, where we actually took off from, that was kind of a rough 24 hours. You got to see people's true colors. Leaders who had been in the Army for a number of years, who prided themselves that, you know, we can do this, guys, we can do this, falling apart. And I'm not going to say I lost respect for certain people, but I took on a new perspective. I got to see people in a different light that I hadn't expected to see them in. I remember being in country during one of the very first many Scud alarms we had. We had chemical agent alarms in the compounds, and it was a high-pitched squawk box. And when that went off, you had to don masks, your whole NBC, and somebody over the PA system would say, go to MOP 2, go to MOP 3, go to MOP 4.
MOP meaning what?
The MOP levels, the chemical agent levels, the boots, the rubber gloves, the whole bodysuit.
Let's sink in here.
Right. So we had a protocol that we had to follow, and you had to stop whatever you're doing as soon as you heard that squawk box go off. And it was loud enough that everybody in the compound could hear it. And ironically enough, we had just pulled into the compound. We were bussed in. We hadn't even been, actually, I take that back. Let me step back a minute. We had gotten to Tent City. When we first landed in Riyadh, they bussed us from King Fahd Airport to one of the many tent cities that had been set up. And we were told, okay, this is where we're going to be. This is our AO, our area of operation for right now. You know, the Army may move us at some point, but this is where we're going to be. Well, we weren't even there 2 hours when the first Scud alarm went off. And, you know, before we left Devens, before we boarded planes at Westover, we had to pack our personal items that we carried with us in a certain fashion. And one of the things they wanted us to have organized was the NBC equipment, because we didn't know when we landed what type of situation we'd be. You know, would we have to exit the plane in full chemical gear? We didn't know. We're walking into a completely unknown situation.
In your training at Devens prior to embarkation, did you have any, quote, practice in Scud
Oh, yes.
manuals so that you were using what you were taught?
Exactly. And, you know, they say if you do things, I don't know what the magic number was, like 25 times, it becomes automatic after the 25th time. You know, the old saying, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice.
Yeah.
You know, the Army was good for that. You know, if we had downtime, one of the NCOs would walk by and go, gas, 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 and you'd have to do the drill. And it got to the point where it was no longer a scare factor. It was no longer, you know, okay, it was just another drill. We got to the Sandy City, the tent city, and the alarm went off. And we all kind of looked at each other like, was this a drill or was this the actual thing? And somebody yelled in, nope, this is the actual alarm, go for it.
This is no
so
drill.
all of us lower enlisted guys, because we were so used to doing it, just automatically did it. I saw one of my NCOs fall apart. Oh my God, I don't want to die. I don't want to say goodbye to my wife. I don't want, you know, that was one of the first times that the realities of war hit the 94th MP. And we, you know, it was kind of a huge automatic wake-up call that we're not reservists anymore. We're not, okay, reservists who were activated. We are now fully functionally MPs, military police officers, theater of operation, in-country soldiers that are expected to do a job, and we're expected to do it well.
Now, can you explain what your jobs were, what your basic assignment was? For example, I've heard the term QRT. Were you assigned anything like that? Quick response team.
We did have QRTs. We did have quick response. Basically, the MPs, when I was in, we had a three-pronged mission. We had physical security, we had corrections, and we had post-camp and station, law enforcement, garrison type of work. Traditional military police work. Drive around in cruisers, write tickets, do burglary investigations, and then depending on the type of investigation, it would be determined whether it's going to get turned over to MPI, Military Police Investigations, or CID, which is the Criminal Investigations Division of the United States Army. Basically, the way it was described to me is CID covers all major felonies, which would be a felony on the civilian side of the house, and MPI does the misdemeanor type stuff. We were there just to do basic physical security, corrections, basic law enforcement missions, but if something came up, then we had liaisons with CID units as well as MPI units that would come in and do their precise stuff. But when we got in theater, command still didn't know where we were going or the type of mission we were going to have. But being MPs, we were diversified in those three different areas. So they could send us to an established prison, do corrections work. They could send us to some sort of holding area to do corrections / physical security type work. Or they could say, here's the MSRs, you've got Humvees, patrol them, do traditional law enforcement type work. It was entirely up to the Army as to where they wanted to put us, the mission they wanted to assign us. There was a lot of logistics that go on behind the scenes that we'll never know, that we'll never fully understand. As luck would have it, we got assigned traditional law enforcement type work. We had...
What does that constitute?
Okay. Our basic premise was patrolling the MSRs, main supply routes.
Okay, thank you.
It was the highway system that was established both by the Army as well as the existing, like King Fahd Highway, for an example. That was a major thoroughfare that went from one part of Saudi Arabia all the way through. That was dubbed MSR Dodge. And that was one of our main highways, MSRs, that we had to patrol. We would run up and down, make sure convoys that had broken down had commo, that their units knew where they were, that they had support, that they had water, that they had other things. Basically, that the Army knew that this vehicle broke down, that these people were stranded. Did they need a ride? Did they need commo support? Did their vehicle break down? Is there, you know, were they in part of a convoy that didn't have a radio that was assigned to it? So they broke down and nobody knows where they are.
Where they were, yeah.
Because the marching orders in any theater of operation that I understand, it may be different, was that if a vehicle broke down, you left it by the side, you hope maintenance, which is usually the trail vehicle, would see it, and they would attend to them.
Okay.
But
Do you have
the
any
main body
overhead
has to
coverage,
keep
like
going.
Helicopters or
What's that, sir?
any sort of overhead coverage as you're going forward? Helicopters on the loop?
It depended on the mission, it depended on the type of supplies. Understand that when the troops first hit Saudi Arabia, you had so many troops going in different directions trying to encapsulate that country and basically cordon off the areas that we were expected to, that sometimes people were forgotten and overlooked. You had mass troops going in different directions, so there wasn't that opportunity to provide air cover for every convoy. There wasn't that opportunity to have infantry support escorting the vehicles. It just wasn't capable. There wasn't enough MPs to do convoy security. Understand that one of the primary missions under physical security, convoy security, is an MP role. We didn't have enough MPs to do that type of role, so we started employing infantry divisions to do certain things. And when I say they, I mean the Army. Started adapting certain infantry units to say, okay, we don't have enough MPs to do physical security at this place. Can you do physical security? We don't have enough MPs to do garrison type work. Can you guard this facility? Can you safeguard this facility? Can you do physical security work? MPs were so spread out throughout the entire theater that they had to mobilize other units, transportation units, infantry units. So the MP mission itself got watered down by a lot of people who hadn't really set their mind on a law enforcement profession. The beauty about our unit, the 94th MP, is we had a lot of civilian police officers who came in and tried to augment their military time. They may have been an MP or whatever in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, an SP, whatever have you, and then wanted to do some reserve time. But in the interim, Monday through Friday, they were a civilian police officer. So we had this infusion of knowledge in our unit that helped us with our mission. Okay. So, you know, the old adage, you're as strong as your weakest link. You know, as far as I was concerned, we didn't really have a lot of weak links as far as our mission, as far as our capabilities, because what we didn't have on the military side, we made up for on the civilian side. And if you read any of Schwarzkopf's books, he talks about the infusion of talent from the Guard and Reserve, because the Reserve had the same thing. You have all these people who are weekend soldiers who have other professions, other interests. You know, they may drive a truck in the National Guard, but the person's a plumber in their Monday through Friday profession. And now you put them in the theater of operation. You've got somebody that can essentially do two jobs, whereas a traditional military trained person, they were taught to drive a truck and that's it. But now you take in the National Guard and Reserve, and if you read any of the books from Colin Powell, General Schwarzkopf, any of the theater commanders, they all talk about this infusion of talent and how did Schwarzkopf describe it? And I'm paraphrasing, the hidden gem, I believe he called it, of the Guard and Reserve, because we did have these kind of talents that the military didn't keep track of, because they didn't train us on how to do that. There was a famous story about Wolfburgers, which was a warrant officer in the theater of operation who was a mess steward. He was in charge of a series of military kitchens. And he went to a lot of his cooks and a lot of his support people and said, look, I noticed the troops are kind of, you know, they're kind of down, they're missing home. What is it something we can do food-wise to kind of bring the guys up, to bring the troops up, the morale? You know, what can we do? And one of the suggestions he got was, well, a lot of the guys that are in the Guard, Reserve, the active duty, they're 18, 19, 20-year-old, they're used to fast food. They're used to McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's. They're used to burgers and fries and shakes. And, you know, now suddenly they're eating traditional Army food, whether it's MREs, meals ready to eat, or as we used to say, meals rejected by Ethiopians, but that's another story for another timeline. You know, the packaged foods or the traditional military foods. They were like, you know, let's bring a little food comfort, a little comfort food. You know, let's get some burgers, some hot dogs, some fries. So this warrant officer who was tight with, and again, I don't know the whole story, this is what was passed down to me, talked to another friend of his who was a warrant officer in transportation and said, do you have any trucks that we could outrig to make portable kitchens? And they searched around and they found a truck that was able to, they could take out kind of the guts and put in a small stove, and he established what was known as Wolfburgers. And this was two warrant officers in the theater of operation who were able to kind of go, okay, let's give the guys and the girls something to think about from home.
But it was a good morale
booster. It was a morale booster, exactly.
You're right. It was a hidden gem.
Again, you know, we brought in traits that the Army hadn't anticipated in their master plan because they hadn't trained us on these skills, on these abilities. There's another story about another warrant officer in the maintenance area who couldn't figure out why the Humvees were burning through air filters as quickly as they were. The Humvee, the high mobility vehicle, which we used predominantly,
To show that.
the high mobility vehicle was designed for a woodland environment. It was not designed for a desert environment, and thus the air filter on it was clogged up with sand, grit. So this warrant officer went to his guys and said, you know, write to your girlfriends, write to your wives, write to your, you know, whoever the females are in your life, you know, school groups, send me pantyhose, send me a boatload of pantyhose. And of course, all the guys thought he was kind of, you know, losing it. What's going on with this? But he realized he was able to use the pantyhose as a filter over the filter.
Yeah.
And it was saving the life of a lot of air filters that otherwise would have been burned up. We had vehicles overheating because the air filters were clogged. So by putting that filter over the filter, it saved the life in a lot of the vehicles over there. And again, how much of this is wives' tales? How much of this is reality? I do know that having been over there, I ate at a number of the Wolf Burgers when we were doing convoy security. Once we'd get to the end of the line, wherever we were going, if there was a Wolf Burger station set up there, we would stop, get lunch, get food.
Local McDonald's.
Yeah. And it was good food.
I just want to just quickly bring these, because we have to not wrap it up, but you had these pre-taken. Could you describe them so that when we show them?
Absolutely. This was pre-deployment. That's when we were leaving the Reserve Center.
Okay.
That is my father, who has since passed, and my mom. This was the old 94th ARCOM Reserve Center, 94th MP, excuse me. We were the 94th ARCOM. We fell under them.
Where is that located?
Grenier Airport.
Oh, okay.
Which is now the FedEx, UPS, whatever hub is over there. This picture was of us in country. That was myself, my platoon sergeant, Sergeant Ginsberg, or my team leader, and our platoon leader, Mark Ranalska. And the reason this picture was taken was we were the first vehicle, the first MP, we were the first MPs in our theater of operation to secure weapons from the Iraqis.
Oh.
When the hostilities were officially ended, one of the things that we were tasked with was collecting weapons and other things from returning troops. Infantry guys, chemical guys, any forward folks that were coming back. That we used to have amnesty boxes. We won't ask any questions. We won't ask you where you got it. We won't ask you, you know, there'll be no sanctions applied. Just turn in the materials to us and we'll make sure it gets to the appropriate people. And we had some infantry guys stop us on the road and say, hey, we've got some weapons we'd like to turn in. So when my team leader had called the lieutenant, he was all ecstatic because he wanted to get this to the Army Times. He wanted to get that picture to the Army Times to say the 94th MP,
is there
3rd Platoon, was the first ones of the entire 94th MP to turn in, you know, weapons of the opposition. And that's why that picture was taken. This was the official welcome home in Manchester, New Hampshire, right on Elm Street. That is the old Center, New Hampshire Holiday Inn, which is now the Radisson. And this was right here at Veterans Memorial Park.
Very good.
This was the official welcome home patch that we were issued.
More in-country stuff here.
Yes. When I talked about doing convoy security, sometimes we were just simply communications. We would get to a certain point in the convoy and they'd say, okay, we're going to have a break in communications here. We need you to set up your antennas and just be a communications relay. So that's what we were. Yeah. A lot of times we were also traffic control at that point as well. So we were communications as well as traffic control. Okay. If hostiles tried to come in, if we had like Bedouins trying to leave, make sure that their exit was expedited. This was one of the convoys that we got assigned to. That was some of the stuff going to the front. This was ultimately our welcome home. I believe this picture was taken at when we actually disembarked at Westover Air Force Base. Pan Am officially flew us home, and we had one stop in Italy, but we were told we could not get off the plane in Italy. So I had a friend of mine who was in the Navy, who was Italian, and I had asked him before I deployed, I said, you know, if you could go to Italy, what's the one thing you'd want to do? And he'd say, you know, I've never been to Italy. I'd like to just touch the soil. So I asked one of the flight stewardesses when we had, because they had opened the doors so that way we could, you know, at least get some oxygen because we knew we were going to be on the plane for a while. I asked one of the stewardesses, I said, look, I said, is it okay if I just run down and touch the soil? That's all I want to do. And of course, my NCOs were like, if we don't see it, we can't enforce it. So like
looked left.
like a bat out of whatever, I ran down, I slapped the tarmac, and I ran back inside the plane. And when I came home and I told Mike about it, he was like, wow, you know, that's kind of unique. When we were in Italy, we also resupplied, and one of the things they gave us was cans of Coca-Cola.
Yep, sorry.
They gave us cans of Coca-Cola, and it was written in Italian. So I actually got one of those cans, and I brought it home to Mike and said, from your homeland.
Do you have it in front of you here someplace? Or
No, I gave it to Mike.
Oh, okay.
And this was another picture of...
Down in Elm Street, yeah.
Yep, Elm Street, the return. And that was one of the vehicles we actually deployed with.
I don't know, we got a few minutes more, but what was, very quickly, what was it living, what was the living conditions there? Was it...
Well, it's ironic because... It's ironic.
Challenging?
The Army, from a weapon standpoint, issued us a .45 caliber pistol. They issued us a M16, and some of us had M203 grenade launchers. But the one weapon the Army never issued us that they should have was the unofficial weapon of the 94th MP.
And that was...
Because I'm here to tell you, we engaged more flies, more gnats, more whatever, than we did Iraqis.
Okay. And this combat issue or your home issue?
No, actually it was combat issue. We got these in the theater of operation, and it was, I don't know who sent them to us or where we got them from, but we had them in the compound, and that's why I dubbed it the unofficial weapon of the 94th.
I see that, yeah. Now, I got to wrap it up, I think, but based on what you've seen, and obviously we can't talk about all of it, but was your experience something that was a positive or negative as far as how you've lived your life since then? How would you feel about answering that?
I think my military experience overseas was both positive and negative for different reasons. It was very positive because I set myself up for a goal, a task, and I was able to accomplish it.
Good.
Very positive in the sense that I got to see a portion of the world that I otherwise never would have seen. I got exposed to a culture that I never would have known anything about. I got to see a different facet of life. Negative in the sense that when we returned, the American population was very, very positive. I want to make that abundantly clear. We had welcome home parades, we had ceremonies, we had articles in the paper, we had letters from home, we got care packages, we had the support of the American people. My argument is not with that. We came home to a crummy, crummy economy. I went from being a college graduate on the pinnacle of life to let's go out and get that job and buy a house and start my life, to basically 9 years of unemployment because the economy was that terrible.
Wow.
So even though the politicians were there to say, son, if there's anything I can do for you, yeah, point me in the right direction so I can get a job. I can't talk to you now.
I know. Call me later.
Call me later. You know, here, call my constituent. Well, you don't get any type of response. The only, and I know I speak for a lot of GIs that came home at that time, with all due respect to the American people, we appreciated the flags, the cards, the words of support. We wanted jobs.
Yeah.
We wanted to come home. I mean, I had a college degree that I spent a lot of money on that I wasn't doing anything with. I wasn't afforded any type of opportunities. And I'm not saying that we are veterans, we deserve, no. Give me the opportunity to interview for a job. And if I'm not the best candidate, if I'm not the best person, no harm, no foul. You at least afforded me the opportunity to put my best foot forward. If I didn't put my best foot forward, shame on me. but we weren't even given that. We came home to unemployment and a desolate economy and a lot of politicians making speeches about, thank you for making America safe, and then,
But,
but,
yeah. I hate to leave it a note like that, but that's the way it is. But have you been able, to, since that point in time, obviously, become employed and having a
in
chance to start
1999,
fulfilling?
the state of New Hampshire offered me the opportunity to come to the New Hampshire Department of Corrections, where I am now, and I have been with them since September of '99. In that time, I started off as a correctional officer, and I've worked my way up to a correctional case manager, case counselor. I'm in the community. I'm out of the Concord District Office, and I got to tell you, this is a dream come true for me.
Okay.
I love my job. I love being that catalyst from the individual clients to the probation officers, being that conduit of information. If my clients have a problem, and it's interesting that you started with 211, because that's one of the tools I have in my arsenal, is a couple of contacts at New Hampshire 211. It's a great resource. You can connect with them for questions about Social Security, housing, Medicare, anything out there. And it's not just geared towards military. It's not just for returning troops. It's for anybody that has any type of question about any service. It's a 211. It's a information source for any provider. If you want information about the Red Cross, if you want information about Easter seals.
I know. You're hired.
It's a great, it's one of the many tools I have in my arsenal as a case manager. Good. The other thing that is very, very, and I don't mean to sound like an endorsement for anything, is LinkedIn, the website. I can connect with providers as a case manager that I never would have connected in with. Major decision makers, people that can allow my clients to utilize different resources that I might not have known about otherwise.
Okay.
No matter how much networking, no matter how much training I've gone to, you know, it's a great resource. It's just one of the many tools that is in my arsenal, and I love what I do.
That's a positive note. I have 3 words.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Fern.
Thank you. The pleasure has been all mine.
Oh, you're nice and warm, too.
The pleasure has been all mine. Thank you.
That's a wrap, folks, and I hope that it's something that you would enjoy, but more important, for you guys and gals who are maybe on the cusp, if you have a story and you'd like to share it, please. We'll do all we can to make it worth your while, but remember this, if you don't tell your story, nobody else will, and we've lost all of that. Okay? Again, the name is on the back of the program here. Bob Stevens wishing you all to stay healthy, keep well, and please, if you will, keep in touch. Goodbye.